So great to have you on the podcast today, Nadine. I'm really excited to be speaking with you. For people listening, Nadine is a professional speaker, a high-performance mindset coach, and also a martial artist. And I know I was privileged to hear you speak at the Massage and Myotherapy Association conference this year. And it was really great to hear some of your story. It was a fantastic talk. You had the audience in the palm of your hand the whole time. Really, really engaging and fantastic to hear the story that you've got. It's inspirational. So I'm really looking forward to just bringing a little piece of that to our listeners today. So I guess to start with, Nadine, I'd love it if you could just introduce yourself and let us know what it is you do right now. What's life look like for you at the moment?
Very good for me right now. I'm very privileged. I get to do something that I absolutely love, which I'm sure many of your listeners will relate to. You get paid to follow your passion. And I'm currently someone who gets to go to all kinds of different companies and organizations and speak about resilience, about using your courage. And I use martial arts as a metaphor to frame that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And are you based in Australia then, or do you travel further abroad?
I'm based in Sydney, but I've just come back from New Zealand yesterday, and I'm off to America next month. But, I love working in Australia because, for one thing, there's a very similar sense of humour.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that's great. And I guess part of the story that we heard at the MMA conference was around your childhood and a few unusual things that are going there. But there's always been this sort of constant love of martial arts too, even from when you were really young. Can you sort of describe what it was like for you growing up, being a girl, being good at martial arts? What was that like?
A little different. My friends liked ponies and ballet, and I liked, trying to kung fu leaves in the backyard on the trees. But, I was very lucky to find something that I was really interested in, and even a lot of grown-ups, they come to me these days and say, how do I find that thing that I love so much? So I count myself as quite lucky to that I was passionate about. I joke about the Karate Kid movie that was out when I was a little kid, and that was the thing that got me, sort of really intrigued by it, and seeing the relationship between Mr. Miyagi, the teacher and the student really intrigued me as well. So I went off in search of one of those for myself.
Yeah. And then it sounds like as you were a young adult, you did use some of that martial arts training. You were working as a bouncer for a little while. Because I've read the book, it's a fantastic book, by the way, that you've written about this story that you've got here. But I guess, how do you see that at that time, the training that you had, it helped you physically in your job, but there was also a lot more than that the training seems to have over time, at that time and since then, been able to build into your life. Talk a bit about that. What was it that you gained from martial arts other than just the ability to kick and punch people?
That's such a small part of it, even though it seems like the whole thing. It's only a fraction of what actually matters to me about it. So the thing that attracted me to it was the physical activity and the intensity of it. But there was also an element of beauty in the art form. And I was even, I find beauty in the uniforms and the way people tie their belts and the way everyone lines up and stands. There's something very simple about it that I love. But the thing that's really changed my life and the thing that's meant the most to me is what my teacher calls the internal training, which is nothing to do with kicking and punching. That's just the avenue that we relate to each other on. And it opens up the field for discussions about character, about developing yourself as a person. And, that's what's kept me coming back for over 30 years now to this type of training. I'm a physical person. I need to relate to the world that way. But, really it's taught me so much about what you value, and it's not enough for me to just rest on my laurels in life. I'm always trying to grow and develop. I've been trying to do that all morning today even. And it's always brought me back to that place of having a beginner's mindset and wanting to learn more. And probably, you mentioned that working as a bouncer, I thought that was the kind of job that you went into when you had a black belt when you were young. And the real reason that I went into that was because I hadn't finished high school. I dropped out of high school because I was having some family issues. Went off to live on my own and be all independent. But it always bothered me that I hadn't completed the thing that I'd started. And martial arts brought me back to that in a funny way. It took me into a career where I found out the reality of martial arts, through getting into physical confrontations, and I found out that you have to know more than theory, more than textbook. And I'm sure it's the same in massage and myotherapy. Not having that hands-on experience, it really shows. You can't just learn from a book. So I realized what I needed to do in that area of my life, but training in martial arts also brought me back to other areas where I needed to learn more. So, getting my black belt made me realize that if you work really hard at something, you improve your life, you feel better about it. And my teacher said to me, where else do you need to apply this knowledge about yourself, about discipline and determination? And I was like, I think I need to go back to school. So, it took me a little while to get there, going out of it through martial arts and then coming back. But, that was one of probably the quickest payoffs, was I realized that I had the power to go back and change something that didn't feel right to me. So I went back and finished high school and went to uni, and I never used my degree. I got a degree in social policy and criminology, but I never used it. But I'm glad that I went and ticked that box for myself.
Yeah, fantastic. And we have a saying in our business, it's common in coaching, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And that's a perfect example of it. It's like if you're living a life where you're finding some things unfinished and there's a lot of chaos and whatever, sometimes there's just one thing you can latch onto, practice and get experience and complete or work your way through the journey. And the discipline and habits that you build in that sort of then overflow to other parts of your life. And it's the same in business. We obviously speak with a lot of business people, and if they've got chaos in the rest of their life, often their business is in chaos too. And sometimes by sorting out a relationship or even just becoming more certain within themselves internally, sometimes that then flows over into business, and they're like, wow, my whole business has changed and I don't even know why. I haven't done any business work for ages. I've been working on this internal stuff. And that's a perfect example of how that sort of stuff flows through everywhere. Is there I'm sure working in nightclubs in Sydney, being a bouncer, being a woman and young, there must be some awesome stories you can tell about that. Do you have anything you can just sort of pick out as maybe the most interesting or the most crazy story that you have from that time in your life?
Oh, they're a bit gory, I've got to say, but I found out, like I said to you before, I found out the reality of this thing that I did. I'd done martial arts, when I was a little kid, and I did a system that was non-contact. So I got a false sense of security, and I got a false sense of self, and luckily the teacher that I've been with for the last 20 years is all about reality checking and helping you to develop real confidence. And I go into a lot of companies now and talk about the difference between confidence and arrogance. And when you're doing business, especially business for yourself, where you're assuming all of the risk, it's very important to come from that very grounded, confident, knowing, that gut place, rather than, a self-image that you've built based on what might have been success or, a perceived ability that may not be as grounded. So, working in nightclubs and getting eye gouged and ending up in the hospital I got my big toe chopped off and sewn back on once in a bar fight, pretty gory kind of stuff. But someone threw a table at me and guillotined it up. Can't tell now though, I've had plastic surgery. They look exactly the same and they both work. But, things like that made me realize, you can't kid yourself about who you are and what you're capable of. If you have siloed thinking and a perspective where you think you know what you're doing, but you don't test that in the market, you don't reach out and really find out the reality, it can be a bit of a house of cards. So I'm big on, trying to keep things very grounded and simple in a way, I guess.
So if you're saying, because what I'm hearing is the difference between confidence and arrogance might be that confidence has a bit more grounding and a bit more maybe exposure to the real world, and then seeing real or noticing the truth of the reaction that you get to where you are. What would you say something people can do if they're in a place where they're feeling like quite confident, quite cocky, quite arrogant? How can they tell the difference? Is there something that lets you know, yeah, this is authentic, or maybe, oh, hang on, I might need to work on this some more?
One really good litmus test that I use across the board with people when I'm looking at someone, I'm thinking, I don't know about you, is, in fighting. I used to be a kickboxer. So one thing in fighting is that my teacher, who was a very famous fighter, used to say to me, if they need to tell you how good they are, they're not that good. And it's the ones that, like, he's a very humble man, even though he has every right to brag about all kinds of things, but he's very, 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 very humble. And I really noticed that. I've caught myself trying to, especially when I was younger, trying to let people know about what I perceived as my strengths, or, something that I'd done, because, I guess that we all have that part of us that wants to put our best foot forward. And my thing now is just gut checking the why behind that. Am I trying to share something with you, or am I trying to impress you? And when people try and impress me, it always makes me kind of scratch my head like, I liked you better before you were trying to impress me, So I guess there's a difference, and that can be a tricky thing for people. I know when I first started out being self-employed, I wasn't sure how far to put my best foot forward, because as a business owner, you have to be willing to share your strengths and show, hey, here's what I can do, here's what I'm worth. It'd be good for you to come and do business with me because. And if you don't do that, people will never know. But at the same time, if you're finding people peacocking around and, maybe the thing that they're telling you isn't necessarily the thing that you're getting, that's a good indication too, that it might not be 100% spot on. They might be a little overconfident in what they're delivering. So I'm a fan of that old saying, it's better to under promise and over deliver than, talk a big game and then not be able to follow through.
Yeah, I love that. And I don't know if you're familiar with Brene Brown. She's another amazing TED speaker.
Yes.
Yeah, we were lucky enough, Leash and I went to see her recently when she was speaking in Melbourne. It was great. But one of her things, I can't remember the exact quote, but she says something like, don't puff up and don't shrink. Just be authentic, be you. And I do think especially, there you go, you've got it right there, daring greatly.
Brene, right there.
Yeah, fantastic. But it reminds me a bit of that, there is too much puff sometimes. There's too much getting out there and too much peacocking, too much showing. But at the same time, especially for women, if I can say that, there's often a kind of a social pressure to step back too far and to not put yourself out there. And I know dealing with massage therapists, sometimes we do hear, I just don't want to put myself out there. I don't want to have to go and tell people what I do or anything like that. But the truth is that doesn't really serve anyone either. If no one knows that you're there to help them, to serve them, whoops, you don't have clients, you're not helping anyone. So there has to be that middle ground of authenticity and of being able to make true connections with people.
I love that you just said authenticity. And that's how I learned to do it in business, in speaking, in coaching, and just in being friends with people. It has to come from that gut knowing place where you're not trying to be something that you're not. And even if I'm trying to convince you that, I'd like to do business with you, if I'm trying too hard, then everyone has a good meter, I think, for when they're being sold. So I know when people try to sell me, I step back.
Yeah, exactly.
It just depends. I always try to do business on a gut level of, am I being genuine? Am I just leading with what I know to be true? And that's always a good indicator for me afterwards about how I'll feel about it. Win, lose or draw in business, in life, if I did what I feel was authentic and genuine, I'm probably going to come away feeling good about it. Even if you don't want to work with me, that's okay, because it was a genuine interaction rather than, I tried so hard to show you all my peacocky stuff and then you rejected me anyway.
Yeah, and it's never good for business either. It's like if you convince someone too much and then they join you and suddenly realise, well, hang on, that's not really what you like. It's not really what you've got to offer. That doesn't serve anyone either, right? They're not happy. You can't give them what you need. Your reputation suffers from it. It's always better to just be authentic and make sure there's a right fit there. What about I know as you journeyed on, you did study under Sensei Benny, who's a great a world champion at several levels. I'm actually not that into martial arts, so I don't know the correct title to use for him and all that sort of stuff. But especially in the book, you've shared a lot about how he was more than just a trainer. He really was a mentor, someone that you spent quite a bit of time learning under and learned a lot of life lessons from, and I guess character, like you mentioned earlier. What was it like studying under someone who was so famous and so centered, so authentic themselves?
I remember sitting down with him once when I was in my, excuse me, my mid-20s and saying to him, I don't care that you're famous. And then I was like, no offense, like, please don't kill me. But I wasn't interested. That's why, when I went into working in security and bodyguarding people, I worked with a lot of musicians when I lived in Canada. And I was good at that because I wasn't interested in them being famous. They're just people, So being around someone like Sensei Benny was fine for me because that wasn't what interested me about him. What he had to offer as a teacher was what interested me. So to give you a tiny bit of background on him, so his name's Benny the Jet Urquidez. He's an undefeated world champion fighter and a real pioneer in that sport for about 25 years. And he's got about 1 million black belts, and he's quite a famous guy. He's been in a lot of Hollywood movies. That's all wonderful, but I had been studying martial arts for nearly 10 years by the time I met him, and I have never before or since met someone who was as good a teacher. And he said to me, look, I'm a way better teacher than I ever was a fighter. And he didn't mean that in a, hey, buy my thing. Not interested in that part at all. We would do a lesson that was meant to be 1 hour, and I'd look up, it'd be 5 hours later. And I learned, he blew my mind on so many levels because he had such a deep love and understanding of what he does. So I think it's really hard to find a good mentor. I know people reflect that back to me all the time because when I go and speak, I talk about how important it is to have good people in your corner, even if it's just one, So I'm a real believer that if you have someone who's interested in teaching you and who does a good job of it, or someone who's interested in backing you, helping you learn and grow and reflecting to you that that's a really good thing to do. It's different from a friend who might just be like, oh, don't change. I love you how you are. Someone who supports you to keep developing yourself and gives you exercises and avenues to be able to grow. I'm sure like what you do for people, you've put a lot of time, energy and love into learning your craft, and then you can expedite matters for people. And if you do it with a wholehearted approach, that's a really special thing to find, and it can have massive influence on the trajectory, not only of your business, but of your life. And that's definitely what happened to me.
Yeah. And sometimes giving feedback to people is not easy. The truth isn't always easy to deliver sometimes. And so someone like Sensei Benny, who's got such a grounded internal confidence, is just so knows who he is, will then find it much easier to give honest and open feedback to the people around him, especially students. And that sometimes is uncomfortable, but it is the way to fastest growth. And I remember reading in your book, there's a moment where you just finished one of the big fights that you'd done. And I think it was the one where you broke your finger punching someone so hard, like this moment, and you'd won. And it was like this super proud moment. And then you're back in the room afterwards, and Sensei Benny is just like telling you all the things you could have done better and all the ways you could have finished the fight earlier and made it even better than it was, even though you won. And I'm like, wow, that's hard to hear sometimes, I bet, but it is also just so it speaks volumes about who Sensei Benny is and the confidence he has and the goal he has to help you get even better.
Yeah, I mean, I personally have found one of my biggest lessons in life is it's very difficult to tell truths that are going to hurt people. I've learned that lesson many times over, and I really value people who model what that looks like, and he's definitely been one of them because nobody likes to hurt anyone else's, their feelings, their ego, any of that stuff. But he always reminded me that that's only okay when there's a pre-existing relationship of trust, and that trust has to be earned. And it's an honor system. It's based on mutual respect. So he didn't come into the dressing room after my fight and go, oh, you could have beaten her this way and you didn't do well enough or anything. He was the one person who wasn't just like, wow, that was amazing. And unfortunately, what he said was true. I probably could have done a better job of it, if I'd had a different perspective. So I took it on board. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but he's the one person who I give that position to in life, especially in that context, because I trust his intentions.
Yeah.
He's not trying to big note himself or be important. He's simply trying to help me grow. And, it's great when you can find somebody in your life that you trust to help you grow, who also is very kind and generous with you. but who's willing to tell you the hard truths, because, we can't grow when we have no mirror. And sometimes the mirror we look at ourselves through is through a filter.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
if 3 people that you trust are telling you the same thing, probably true. Maybe you can't see it.
Yeah.
I very much valued that in him.
Yeah, that's great. And it is something totally different context, but I feel the weight of truth sometimes when I'm dealing with our clients. People will come to us and ask for feedback on an ad or a website or something. And it's like sometimes I can see they have put a lot of time and effort into something, but there's still quite a lot of things that I would like to change that are going to make it better. And I always have that inner battle. It's like I want to be as positive as I can, encourage them to continue changing and growing and doing this work. And at the same time, it's my responsibility to show them a better way, or if I can, reveal what that might look like. And it's not always easy, but it's something that I guess all teachers and trainers, we all kind of have to work through that. How can we deliver the truth in love? And again, Brene Brown, she's coming up again, but she's got a saying that clear is kind. Right? Being clear is kind and unclear is unkind. So whenever you've got something you want to be able to share with someone or do with someone, whether it's staff or a student or a client, for a massage therapist, it might be a client that comes in, being able to be super clear to me is always what I look back to. I'm like, I'm feeling a bit like I don't quite know how to put this or whatever. I'm just like, clarity is the thing. Just be super clear. And even if in the moment it feels uncomfortable or painful, for the greater good and over a longer time, it's much easier. Rather have that 8-10 seconds of discomfort saying something hard to someone, rather than have it like messing around with whatever's going on for the next 10 years. It's just like, get it right, get it clear, go through that pain.
Clear is so different to harsh. And I think a lot of people get that one wrong. Like, I'm just going to give you the unfiltered, brutal truth about what I think of your new logo. Bam, ouch. I worked so hard on that, That's so different to, working with a client. I had one of the guys that I coach who lives over in Ireland the other day, and he'd created this brilliant course, this online course, and he wanted me to watch the videos and give him honest feedback. And I said, there's 3 categories of honest feedback. I can give you the I feel a bit fragile today feedback, where it's, I wrote a good list and a critical list.
Yeah.
Like critique. And I said, you tell me which list you want the most from. Do you want, 50-50, or is everyone telling you it's great? Like when I had my fight, is everyone cheering for you, but no one's telling you the other part? And in his life, I'm that person. So I made sure I gave a little of the good and then hit him with the critique and then finished on the good, because I care about him. I don't want him to be sad. But if he trusts me and he knows I have his best interests at heart and I want to help him grow, he'll, he was like, oh, okay, thank you. But everything I said, I believed, and I really do want him to get better. So it can be a bit of a tricky thing, but I also always gut check myself before I open my mouth, and make sure that, is that just my opinion, or is that something that I have a valid reason for thinking? And, I'm a big fan of evidence, in saying to him, be careful when you do this in your video. It was because I paid for, a 5-figure business course that mentioned that. And I read this book by that expert that I then passed him on to that mentioned that, and give the evidence, not the opinion.
Yeah, I love that. And sometimes receiving feedback from the opposite end of that, it's sometimes when we get feedback that we don't like or that feels uncomfortable, I should say, our defenses go up and we suddenly find ourselves not listening to it just because it's not something we particularly want to hear in that moment. But having the humility and honestly it's confidence internally to be able to say, that might suck. It feels a bit like a slap in the face, but is there truth in it? What do I need to take away from that? How is it helping me get toward my end goal? And that's really part of being a confident and centered person as well, right? To be able to give feedback when needed and also to receive it honestly and not just follow it like the letter of the law or whatever, but follow it if it's right, if you can work through it yourself.
Did Brene mention, her steps before she gives feedback? I read one of them recently and she was talking about you have no right to give feedback unless you're willing to come across the table and sit on the same side as the person you're giving the feedback to. And I think easy to be critical of other people, you know, their driving, their, you know, their business, whatever the thing is. But, you know, it's a whole different ballgame when you come around to the other side of the table and you say, listen, the reason I know that that's not great in your video is because I used to make this other mistake in my video, and I was really grateful when somebody told me, even though it hurt my feelings. You know, just to be able to relate and say, hey, I'm in it with you. I've been there too. You know, that sounds very different, and I think it takes the edge off. If you trust someone, believe they're trying to help you, and you know that they're in the boat with you, they're in the fight with you, whole different ballgame.
Yeah, and that's that authenticity too, isn't it? It comes back to that, having an authentic relationship with whoever you're working with.
Yeah, and Sensei Benny used to say to me, you know, in teaching martial arts, you have to let the student be the teacher. Don't think because you've got the black belt on or because you're running the successful business that you know everything or that you're always right. He was like, the student, the white belt, the beginner will teach you so much about you and what you need to do, even if it's just in teaching it to someone else. It gets held up like a giant neon sign mirror to you. Am I doing that still? Am I being that thing that I'm telling you to be? You know, and I found, you know, even in giving that feedback to my coaching student, you know, the other week he was mirroring back to me, well, I'd like you to make more videos. And I was like, oh, thank you. Good. Thank you. Okay. You know, I was like, oh, it's interesting. The things that they'll teach you are priceless.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. And we all learn. We're always on a journey of learning. And even yourself, like we've talked about how you had a couple of these big fights. You were doing really well. You won. And then there was a massive health challenge that you came across. I'll let you tell that part of your story yourself. But I want to be able to just sort of flesh that out a little bit, because some of the skills that you learn and that internal work that you've done on the journey of martial arts really came forward in a way that was maybe unexpected and super powerful for you in a hard time in your life.
I think that's the thing. Like, I'm so privileged I get to go and speak about courage and resilience now. And I always mirror to people, you know, I was just over in New Zealand speaking to 800 real estate agents about being resilient.
Wow.
It's crazy, right? You know, and I know they've had 5 years of growth and then a more recent market downturn, which I'm sure many people in Australia can relate to as well. You know, and I was saying to them, it's in the challenging times that on the surface level, people will go, oh no, market dropping, business declining, panic, you know, and feel all the negative feelings and thoughts that go with that. But if you're focused on being resilient, you see those times as teaching you something. You know, so I looked back on all of the times in my training where it had been hard, where, you know, Sensei Benny had given me critical feedback instead of saying, yay, you know, and it's discouraging. But the point is that you go back and you start again on Monday.
Yeah.
You know, and I look back on the challenging times in my training or in my business the same way. What did it teach me? What's the evidence that I gained from it? Which means, did I go back on Monday? Yes. Did it make me stronger? Yes. Will I make sure I do it better next time? Tick. Yes. Evidence. Yeah. You know, and I added up all that evidence when, you know, my life took a giant face plant. You know, I was at the top of my competitive career, and then all of a sudden I got Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a type of blood cancer. So basically overnight my sporting life changed, my career changed, you know, everything changed out of nowhere. So in getting through that process, I had to call on all the things that I'd learned from my training, all the things that Sensei Benny had taught me. And that's when I learned to really value the hard lessons. It wasn't the days where, you know, he said, great job, kid. You know, it was the times that he'd put the energy and the love into me to give me the hard lesson, because it would help me mature and grow. And that's what I really needed when I was going through chemo for 4 months and, you know, doing all the things that I didn't want to do. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners have, you know, that Sunday morning feeling where you want the day off, but you've got to work on your business, and you can choose not to, or you can do something that's going to get you somewhere.
Yeah.
And finding that out.
It is, and it's one of those weird things about being human, right? Part of our experience as humans is that we all want to be courageous. We all want to have those moments of feeling like we are pushing through and being courageous. But at the same time, we all want to avoid pain. We all want to be comfortable. And the weird truth is that you only have courage in moments of discomfort. You can't be courageous and comfortable at the same time. So it's one of those just totally crazy human experience things. And being able to look at the periods of extreme discomfort or challenge, like those massive things, whether health or business or whatever, sometimes in the moment it still feels super painful. But when you can kind of flip it around even just a little bit and say, yeah, but I'm building resilience right now. This is building character. This is going to get me through some future challenge way easier because I've built the muscle of that now. Even just a little bit of that for most people is enough to see them through. But you've had like a massive serve of both of those things. What was it like going through cancer, going through treatment, especially for someone who was so physical? Like you said, you relate to the world in a very physical way. How did that impact you internally?
It was massively humbling because it was, I got stuck in an interesting trap where people were like, you're strong, you'll beat this. If anyone can beat it, you can. And, I realized I got all these mirrors about how people saw me. And I didn't feel strong or able to handle it, or, all of those big, those big feelings that you did. Maybe I did at the beginning, but after, 6 months of treatment, I felt pretty shattered. And life doesn't stop. I had some really major things going on. My brother had just passed away from lung cancer right before I got sick. I had so many things happening in my normal life, and then I had cancer on top of it. So it was pretty time. But Sensei Benny used to say to me when I was going from like the touch contact martial arts when I first met him through to learning more full contact reality, not so textbook martial arts, he used to say to me, it doesn't hurt any less if you close your eyes. So if if there's a shot coming at you and you still get hit.
Yeah.
Usually it hurts even more because you didn't see it. You couldn't deflect it. You couldn't do anything about it. You just braced for impact. And I knew that going into my cancer treatment intellectually. I knew you got to face this head on. You need to do whatever you have to do to get through it. But there are moments, like you said, where it hurts and it sucks and it's no fun, and you feel weak that day or vulnerable, and it makes it much harder to deal with. But I look back on those things now, and I appreciate them for what they were. It wasn't easy. It's definitely changed my life now in some ways that are tricky and challenging. I've got ongoing fatigue. I've got, it's changed my physicality, but at the same time, it's given me a whole new perspective, and a whole new way of treating my body. I'm much kinder to my poor little body than I used to be. I used to put it through the ringer and make it do all kinds of very difficult stuff. And I'm much, much more compassionate towards myself now, which has got to be a good thing.
And are you still involved in martial arts? Are you still a martial artist practicing fighting, that kind of stuff?
I'm not fighting anymore. But I still teach martial arts. I still do martial arts, but I never, even though I was successful as a fighter, I never loved fighting. It was a test to take. It wasn't, something where I'm like, I want to get in there and hit people. I'm so not that person. But as she adjusts her glasses, it wasn't about the trophy for me, and it wasn't about anything to do with contact or violence. It was simply about how can I put myself under intense pressure in this sport that I love in order to grow and learn. And it's a way of testing yourself, I guess. Like it's that theory, we're talking about the difference between confidence and arrogance. How do I build confidence? I build it from my knowing and from evidence. So I used to tell myself, well, maybe if I did that, I could become a champion at it. Maybe. I thought maybe I could. Am I good enough? I don't know. Maybe, in business, could I make that much money? Maybe. And you kind of know in your gut that if you tried really hard, you probably could.
Yeah.
But it's the actual doing that is important. And I had to go into a sport that I kind of didn't even want to go into because it scared me, to find out and to build that confidence.
Yeah, and that's courage. That's exactly what we're talking about, right? Stepping into those moments of the most discomfort is where you do build courage. Yeah, it's a fantastic example. That whole story is a fantastic example of someone stepping up into that place of courage and making the best of what happens in life because of it. What do you see as next for you then, Nadine? Like, is public speaking, is that the thing now, or is that enough of a challenge for you? What's the next big thing?
Oh, it's challenging. Let me tell you, it's not easy to get up in front of hundreds or thousands of people at a time. I actually really love it. I went into public speaking completely by accident. It wasn't my intention to become a speaker.
So how did that happen? Tell us that story.
Well, I'd never worked in the corporate world, so I didn't know that big conferences happened with professional speakers. I didn't know that was a job that you could go and do. And a friend of mine over coffee, who was actually one of my martial arts students, said to me, would you ever do a TEDx talk? And because I liked Brene Brown and her TED talk, I was like, wow, that would be amazing. I guess it'd be a great opportunity. But I had no idea what I would talk about. I never would have volunteered for it. I didn't know that was really a thing. But she could see that there was relevance for, the stories that I told her through martial arts in the broader world. And I thought they would only apply to martial arts people. They'd only be interested in it.
Yeah.
So, she was involved in the organising committee, and I didn't even know that. So she put my name in, and the next thing I knew, they'd made me the closing speaker at TEDx Sydney in front of 2,500 people at the Opera House, and that was my first go ever public speaking. Eek.
And it was awesome, by the way. If anyone listening to this hasn't seen it, we'll put a link to that YouTube video of that TEDx talk in the notes here, because it's a fantastic talk. And the talk itself comes at another pivotal moment in your life, right? Going from martial arts, recovering health, that identity crisis of wondering what happens now, and then suddenly having this big opportunity come from almost nowhere.
Yeah.
But again, you've got the courage to step into that discomfort and to do it anyway, and to get an amazing turn of events from that.
I think that's, what we're saying about being resilient or the challenging times. It's laying thin layers of experience one on top of the other. Sensei Benny used to call it glazing. It's like being, you're a little lump of clay, and then you put some glaze on the top, and you go in the kiln, and the kiln is the discomfort. The fire of, I don't want to do it, but I'm going to ask for the business, or I'm going to put myself out there. And, like you said, it's natural to avoid pain, discomfort. But every time you do that, you say the one sentence that it's difficult to say, it puts one more layer of glaze. And, I look back now on some of my matches and things and think, how did I break my hand and keep going? Because I'm not very tough, really. But it was all of the little layers of glaze. It was all the Mondays that I came back to training when, it hadn't gone well the week before. And I think, I'm so lucky to have had a coach who makes me look for evidence. And that's what I do with people when I speak, and also when I coach them, is talk about the evidence they have in their lives that, no one's ever asked them to write down usually. And so when you look at your business and the challenges you've been through, even if everything's going really well now, what have you learnt? What experience do you have? What evidence is there to give you that confidence about who you are and what you're bringing to the table? And I drew on the confidence I had from martial arts to get myself to do that speech, because I'm thinking no one's going to care about my karate stories, Apparently I was wrong. Apparently they did. But, it's just those little layers of glaze every time you make yourself uncomfortable. They got me ready to step into a situation that really was pivotal. Like my life was, I'd been self-employed for a really long time, and that business was basically over in many ways. I couldn't run it on the level that I did before because of my recovery, my physical recovery. And, internally, when you've taken a big knock, and a lot of people know that feeling, maybe they got retrenched or they got divorced or something's happened. You've taken that real big knock to your spirit. I think I had taken a big knock more than I'd realised at that point. But during the talk, it's almost like everything comes into focus for me when I was on stage that day in a way that I didn't see coming even. Because they'd asked me what I wanted to talk about. And the idea behind TED is ideas worth spreading. So you get 7 minutes, 15 minutes to share one idea. And I wanted to share this idea of 10 seconds of courage, because it had literally just saved my life in my treatment. When I wanted to run out of the hospital, the thing that got me to sit back down in the chair was just having 10 seconds of courage, because I couldn't do anything massive. I just had to take a little bite-sized piece. It was tricky, but, that's how I got on stage. That's how I said yes to the opportunity. And then, I decided that if I was going to get up there and give this talk about courage, when I was probably feeling the least courageous I'd ever felt in my life, I had to put my money where my mouth was, essentially, and live it out. And that was the link between the physical and the mental part of martial arts. It's not enough to know the theory. You have to be willing to do something about it. And I knew that if I was going to get up there and give a speech about courage, when the truth underneath was that I was at a pretty terrifying moment in my life, I had to be willing to take action, to back myself, to believe in myself. And getting on the stage was that. But they'd also asked me about a month before if I'd do a martial arts demonstration. And I'd said no, because I was feeling really on shaky legs and I was feeling very vulnerable. But Sensei Benny had always talked to me about that evidence. Who are you? Don't just tell me who you think you are on that ego level. Tell me who you really are. And one of the things that I'd learned to tell myself over the years was that I was someone who was strong and who could rise up from difficult challenges. And, I was someone who would rise to the occasion. So I'd always backed myself in that way. And then this thing had happened that had knocked my confidence. And I knew if I didn't do some things like say yes to the talk, my confidence was going to live down here forever. So I had to start doing things to find some new evidence. So part of it was doing the talk and part of it was doing a demonstration at the end.
Yeah. And how did the demonstration go?
Well, you have to watch the YouTube video.
That's the suspense. Go watch the YouTube video and see.
I decided to do something that I really I had no reason to think I could ever do again. But there was that niggling feeling in the back of my mind saying, you get no points if you don't try. And even if I do try, if I fail, shame on anybody who judged me. And that's how I sort of try to make decisions now as well. Should I try my business? Should I try this or that? Should I try Zumba class? Shame on anyone who judges you for trying. Like, those aren't the people that you listen to. And Brené Brown talks about, those who are in the arena, and you don't listen to criticism from people who aren't also sweaty and bloody in the arena, covered in the dust and dirt, because they don't understand what it's like. It's easy to sit in the seats and kind of judge somebody for their attempts at growing or changing or succeeding, but it's a very different thing when you're down in it with them.
Yeah, it's so true.
To be in it with me.
Yeah, I love it. And I love the idea too, 10 seconds of courage. It is about putting yourself on a trajectory that can take you a whole lot further. It's like it's almost what we said earlier, that 10 seconds of discomfort, whether it's a hard conversation or whether it's accepting a TEDx talk. It's like just that little bit of courage, that little 10 seconds of stepping up and doing something puts you on a pathway that goes a whole lot further. And I'm sure if you were a different kind of person and you had have just said, oh, no, I don't want to talk on TEDx, I could never be like Brené, but if you were that kind of person, it would be a very different conversation we'd be having right now. The trajectory of that whole area of your life would be totally different.
It's so scary. Like, I can't imagine. My life's amazing now, like more amazing than I could have imagined at that moment in my life. I find it a little bit scary to look back and think, if I'd said no over coffee with my friend when I didn't actually understand what I was saying no to. And that's the thing that I think we forget when we're trying to stay in our comfort zone and avoid the pain and risk. I think we forget that we don't actually know what we're saying no to. You think it might be this small thing, but things have a snowball effect in our lives.
They really do.
And then I meet you at doing that thing, and then the next thing we know, we've gone over here. And sometimes I try and remind myself that it's not always a small no, and I don't always have the bigger picture information or the ability to look into the future to see, the other opportunities. So I try to say yes to a lot of things. If it's not going to have an adverse effect on me, and it's just the thing that's making me want to hesitate is scary, you know. If it's scary with no pain attached, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, financial pain, if it's not risky in that sense, then I try to just say yes, because if you do nothing, nothing happens, right?
Yeah. And experience is always a good thing, a good teacher. And with the experience, exactly, it's another layer. And I spoke at MMA conference the same afternoon after you'd been in the morning as the keynote speaker. I got a much smaller slot, but I got to speak in the afternoon. And I was inspired by what you'd said, and I shared my own little 10 seconds of courage story in that talk. And for me, it was about, I had been running another business, a digital marketing agency, and I went over to Indonesia on a trip to visit a couple of our sponsor kids. We had, I think, 3 sponsor kids at that point, my wife and I. And I just sort of said yes because I'm like, hey, sponsor kids, like this will be, there might be some challenging stuff that happens there around being part of a different culture and seeing poverty and all that. But I didn't realise I was making something that would turn out to be a big decision in my life. And when I went over there, spent 10 days with these kids, I came back and I was really like, I need to do something more heart-centered with my life. Running a marketing agency just wasn't it just revealed to me that I'd had this sort of underlying, I loved my job, don't get me wrong, I loved my clients and everything, but it was very intellectual, very head-based. And I'd had this kind of underlying missing out of heart connection. And so I ended up selling that agency and starting this business that we do now with my wife, Alicia, or joining her. She'd already just started it. And it was like that little 10-second decision. I had no idea what I was saying yes to. But if I hadn't gone overseas, I wouldn't be where I am right now. And looking back, I see every single thing lining up perfectly to have led me to exactly where I am. And it's exactly like you're saying. You just don't even realise what those little things are. But if you don't put yourself in the position to take those opportunities, then you never know. So you've got to be able to just keep moving. I love it.
I made a suggestion in the speech that I did in New Zealand on the weekend that I might make a suggestion to your listeners too. It's just the idea of doing a quick timeline of your life and trying to reverse engineer it back to those moments where you said yes or no. And we can all pick out a moment where we said yes to something. Maybe you went on a date with someone or went to an interview and it created a high point in your life. But there are also some moments that I can look back on where I think, when did I miss an opportunity? When that feeling of regret, whether it's a big one or a little one, I wish I'd done that differently. Maybe if I'd had the 10 seconds of courage to say or do something different, I wouldn't have had that regret. So it's almost like the ups on the timelines and the downs on the timelines. I look back on those and it really, you can see the pivotal moments where things changed for you. And if you put that filter over the top of your decision-making process moving forward, I think that's very powerful. You did one thing and it changed the course of your life. And, I look back now on all of the teaching that I did with martial arts, and it was never really about the kicking and punching, whether it was me learning or me teaching. And I'm very lucky today that someone else had the perspective to see the thing that always mattered the most to me was the internal training. And I didn't know that would be valuable in the corporate world, or just in I go and speak at community organizations and schools and things as well. You never know sometimes what you're worth until other people reflect it back to you, and or what you have to offer more to the point. So I think if you say yes to things, sometimes you get that information or that evidence reflected back to you that you never could have seen coming. And it changes the course of your life. You do something that you really care about. I do something that I really care about. And it's knowing your value system, really. And one of my major values in how I live my life is helping people. I love helping people because I was helped massively. So I guess it's passing it on and paying it forward.
I love that. And it's a fantastic place to finish an interview like this too. Thank you so much for being part of this, Nadine. It's been really great to chat. Now, you do have the book, 10 Seconds of Courage, which is your story, very inspirational, a whole lot more detail than what we've talked about here. If people want to grab a copy of that book, where's the best place for them to find that?
The fastest place right now is actually Booktopia, believe it or not.
Oh, there you go.
It's always on a good little discount and they're super fast. I wish it was through my website, but it's that's the quickest place to get it. And I wrote it as a little bit of a resource. So Sensei Benny used to make me take notes on everything that he said. So I ended up with a textbook full of, information to pass on. So it's not just my story, it's the story of his story as well, all of his years of experience. And I joke that he's a little bit like Yoda. So it's got a resource packed with Yoda-isms.
Oh, awesome. That's fantastic. I can't wait. Thank you so much again for being on here. We'll put all those links in the show notes so people can click through. And I can't wait to see what happens next for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to talk to you.
Pleasure.